Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today I'm going to be taking a look at Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Now, 2 days ago the game came out. I did a first impressions on the game after I spent about 2.5 hours playing it, and right now, like about an hour or two ago, I ended up finishing the whole game, both the story as well as all of the side quests and secrets and that kind of stuff that you can find. The only thing that's really there for me to do is basically finish some upgrades and that kind of stuff, which I'll do as well when it comes down to the character progression, because it's very different from the base game, as I said in my first impressions as well. But we're going to talk about all of that stuff again. So how has my opinion changed on the game from going from those first impressions to now finally having beaten the game? I have to say I am very impressed. What was there when it first started, I could already kind of see where things were going, but it is a very different experience than Ori and the Blind Forest was. Blind Forest was still very good, but it was more of a baseline game and more of a linear story progression, I guess you could call it. Whereas with Will of the Wisps, it feels more like a role-playing game, and there's also a lot more questing going on. In Blind Forest, you basically just had your main storyline that you would follow through, but this time around, there's actually a lot of side quests that you want to go and accomplish. There's a lot of NPCs that you can interact with and talk to. Like, there's just little characters that you find in the world, and they have some little dialogues for you. Sometimes they will give you quests, sometimes it's just some dialogue, like for example, "Oh, you saved the forest, thank you very much, we can go back to our place now," or something like that. But you're also essentially building a whole town for a certain species in the forest, so to speak. So it's all really cool. The quests are very nice, and the story itself was very great as well. I expected the story to be pretty good. This time around, much more voice lines. Well, voiced lines, I guess you could say. They're not really voice acted because it's a made-up language, but there's a lot more character interaction, which was something that made the game a lot more engaging. You still have a lot of storytelling with the music and the visuals, which I'm going to be using the same footage that I used at the last video, just to kind of try to limit spoilers as much as possible, because I'd highly recommend people to play this game. Now, currently, as of making this video, the definitive edition, which is the one from Ori and the Blind Forest, is on sale for, I believe it's like €5 or something like that. So if you're ever been interested in trying an Ori game, I still really recommend people to play Blind Forest first. Now, when it comes down to how these two games interact with each other, Will of the Wisps is a direct sequel onto Blind Forest, but you don't necessarily need to have played Blind Forest in order to understand what's going on in Will of the Wisps. At the start of the game, you get a little introduction cutscene where you basically get introduced to the characters that you're going to be interacting with, or at least like the ones that you interacted with in Blind Forest, but it gives you enough of a backstory to know what's going on in this game. So technically, no, you don't need to play Blind Forest in order to know what is going on in this game. On the other hand, if you've never played an Ori game and you don't necessarily want to spend, I think it's like €30 or something for this game, then go pick up the definitive edition of Blind Forest first, play that for like however long you want to play, get a taste for the game, and then come into Will of the Wisps, because by the time that you're probably done with Blind Forest, you're going to be pretty excited to play the sequel, as Blind Forest is still a very good game. And because of that, you're also going to appreciate Will of the Wisps even more because of all of the things that it innovates on that was there as more of a base form in Blind Forest. And right now in Will of the Wisps, it has gotten that big overhaul. So what are the big differences? Well, first of all, as I already said, there's a lot more character interaction with NPCs, questing and that kind of stuff. But not only that, the character progression of your character Ori is totally different as well. So in Blind Forest, the way it worked was you had your story that you went through, and then as you came into these new areas, you would find trees of light. I'm just gonna call them that, I don't know what the official name is, but basically you found a tree with a bunch of light, you go stand underneath the tree, you absorb its light, and you get a new ability. And in Will of the Wisps, most of the important abilities that you need are still given that way. So when it comes down to important story abilities that you need in order to get to certain places, for the most part, you still get these abilities given to you throughout the story through these Tree of Lights, which is a really good thing. Now, the main difference is that in Blind Forest, you basically had access to your kit all the time, meaning that if you unlocked a new ability, that ability was available to you at all times. In Will of the Wisps, you need to make choices, and certain abilities, when it comes down to movement and stuff like that, like digging, swimming, dashing, and all of that kind of stuff, that becomes available to you and stays in your basic kit. But there's also a few other abilities, like for example I don't necessarily know what it's called, like the launch ability, and also like the one where you throw a orb that you can bounce off of. Like those things, for example, become abilities rather than basic movement kit thingies like they were back in Blind Forest. So those need to be equipped, and the way it works is you basically get to choose, I believe it's 8 passives out of it's a lot of passives that you get to choose from, and you get to choose 3 actives. So for these actives, for example, these can also be very important ones that you need to obtain through the story, through those Tree of Lights. For example, one of the areas is incredibly dark. You need an ability that makes it bright around yourself so that you can move through this dark area, but this ability needs to be equipped in one of those 3 active slots, thus limiting the other usages that you might like, or the other abilities that you can choose from. For example, the bow is also something that you need to get to certain areas, at least at the beginning. Later on you get new abilities when it comes down to movement, and you don't need the bow anymore. But at least at that point, you need the bow in order to get there, and you need to assign it to one of your 3 ability slots. So it's a little bit more limited when it comes to that, but on the other hand, you can hot swap your abilities. So for example, your heal is something that you normally also put on your hot bar, I guess we'll call it for now. But when you don't need to heal, you swap it out for something. So for example, I usually ran around with my basic attack, my hammer, and then my bow. Sometimes I'd switch it out for something else, like a throwing star or something like that. But then when I feel like I need to heal, I just quickly pull up my radial menu, I select my heal, I heal up, radial menu again, select my hammer again or something like that, and then I go and continue the combat. So there's no real restrictions when it comes down to that. For the passives, exactly the same thing. If, for example, you have the passives on where enemies do more damage, have more HP, but give better rewards, and then all of a sudden you're in a boss fight where you don't want the boss to have plus 70 HP or 70% HP and hit twice as hard, well, you might want to take off those passives, and you can do that mid-boss fight as well, and it immediately affects the fight that you're in as well. So it's a really cool thing that you can do all of those kind of things, and it basically opens up a lot of different playstyles, which I am a very big fan of, because back in Blind Forest, you basically just had your character that got its abilities through progressing through the story, but there was no real customization available. The only thing you could do was upgrade your skill tree differently. Like, you basically had to gain experience. Once you accumulated enough experience, you spent those experience points on certain passives that you wanted, and that was it. Of course, those passives were all there always. In Will of the Wisps, on the other hand, you don't necessarily gain all of those passives like that. They're called shards, I believe, in this game. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they're called shards, like ability shards. And you basically have to pick 8 out of those, all of the abilities that you have access to. Now, some of these you will gain throughout the story. Some of these you just need to buy from an NPC, and then at that NPC you can also upgrade these abilities, like for example damage taken. There is a shard that allows you to take less damage from enemies, and then you can upgrade it further to take less and less damage. This could, for example, be really good when it comes down to the like the zero death playthrough or something like that. It can be very useful for that. So there's a lot of stuff that you can upgrade there, so you can kind of pick and choose how you want to play. For example, a friend of mine, he played through the whole game without using triple jump. I used triple jump to cheese through a lot of the movement mechanics, where you would usually have to go like do it in a specific way or something like that, and I could just use triple jump to basically get past it without needing to do certain things or without having the prerequisite of certain skills as well. So you can kind of do what you want in that kind of thing. When it comes down to the combat as well, I, for example, used my basic attack a lot, and I barely ever used the bow. And I also used my hammer quite often, and then the throwing star. But my friend, for example, he mainly used the bow, and then he used a shard that made it so that he gains energy back every time he hits with a melee ability. So he just basically always ran around with the hammer and the bow, whereas I used my basic attack a lot and then my throwing star. So the different playstyles is something that makes this game so much fun, because you basically get to choose how you want to play, and that is something that was lacking in Blind Forest and that you have access to right now in Will of the Wisps, both when it comes down to your passives, what you want to take there, as well as to your active abilities as well, which is really cool. Now, not only that, there's also a few other things that you can do with your side quests, of course. For example, there is an NPC where basically every time you find seeds, you go to this NPC and he will regrow the glades, which is basically like the big area, or like the forest, I guess we'll call it for now. And every time that you give him a new seed, certain parts on the map will grow new plant life, and these plants can help you get to new areas or something like that. For example, you're also rebuilding the glades by paying stones in one of the NPCs as well, and then this little hub town that you're coming to every now and then to spend upgrades on those abilities or upgrade those shards. And as you are rebuilding that area, you're getting more and more huts, you're getting to interact with new NPCs, you get access to new side quests, and you also get access to like more HP and that kind of stuff, energy shards and stuff like that. So all in all, really cool stuff. It feels more like an RPG, a lot more interactive than Blind Forest was. And it's, in my opinion, just a much better game than what Blind Forest was as well. When it comes down to the story, it was pretty engaging. I almost cried at the end. I know my friend cried at the end for sure, but he's a much more emotional person than I am, at least. But it was still a very like immersive story, I guess you could call it, with the visuals, the music, and just everything surrounding it as well. It was great. So, end verdict: Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Should you play this? Hell fucking yes. Should you play Blind Forest first? Yes. Because it is so cheap right now, I definitely recommend you to play Blind Forest first if you have not already, because Blind Forest is a really good game, and it basically sets up all of the backstory for this one. Even though you technically don't need it, it's going to be very nice that you know all of this backstory, and coming from that game with the restrictions that it has, so to speak, when you compare it to the new one, it is going to make you appreciate Will of the Wisps even more, and just going to give you a much better gaming experience. Both of them are very good, but if I had to pick and choose one of them, which was the better one, then Will of the Wisps definitely takes the cake for me. So definitely not disappointed with the sequel. It's pretty much the perfect sequel that anyone could have ever asked for. And yeah, that's pretty much gonna be it for me. So I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.